गुड मॉर्निंग स्टुडंट्स. मागच्या लेक्चरला आपण पाहिलं की रिप्रोडक्शन इन लोअर अँड हायर प्लांट्स. सो विल रिवाइज इन शॉर्ट. In this lecture, we have discussed about pollination, self-pollination, and cross-pollination. There are three types of self-pollination. That is, there are three types of pollination: autogamy, geitonogamy, and xenogamy. Okay, we already discussed all these things in detail. After that, in this diagram, I shown you what is the difference between self-pollination and cross-pollination. Now, there are some agents for pollination. First is the abiotic agents and second, biotic agents. Abiotic agents are non-living agents, and in this type, there are two agents, that is wind and water. Out of this, we have discussed about wind pollination, that is anemophily. And now we are starting the pollination by water, that is hydrophily. Hydro is the word which suggests water. So up to this we have already discussed. Now today's point is pollination by water, that is hydrophily, and pollination by wind is anemophily. You can see here anemophily. There are some adaptations in that plants to adapt this pollination by wind. Now what is hydrophily? When there is pollination by the agency of water is called as hydrophily, and it is found in some 30 genera of aquatic monocots. 30 genera, that is Vallisneria, Zostera, Ceratophyllum, etc. So these are some examples, and here the diagram is of Vallisneria. So pollination by wind is called as hydrophily, and to adopt this type of pollination, there are some adaptations found in that flowers. First adaptation, flowers are small and inconspicuous. The size of the flowers are very small and inconspicuous, means you cannot see these flowers from uh, long distance. Okay, that are inconspicuous, that are small in size. Okay, and they are not attractive. Perianth and other floral parts are unwettable. You know that what is perianth? Perianth is the type of flower in which sepals and petals are attached to each other. You cannot distinguish in between sepals and petals as they are united. So, perianth and other floral parts are unwettable, means they cannot be unwettable, म्हणजे ते ओले नाही होत. There are some mucilaginous covering is there, due to that they cannot wet in water. Pollen grains are long and unwettable due to presence of mucilage. Whatever the pollen grains produced by the anther, these pollen grains, see, these pollen grains are long and unwettable. They cannot wet, means um, they cannot be wet in that flower water. So due to presence of mucilage, nectar and fragrance are lacking in the flower. Nectar means sugary substance and fragrance means a sweet odor, sugandha. So this nectar and fragrance are lacking in the flower. When the nectar and fragrance is produced, okay, the nectar and fragrance is produced in the plant when they attracts the insects for pollination or butterflies or birds. At that time nectar is needed, okay, or fragrance is necessary at that time. But here the pollination is taking place by the agency of water, hence there is no need to produce nectar and fragrance. Hence nectar and fragrance are lacking, means they are absent in this type of flowers. So what is shown over here, this is the male and female plant of Vallisneria. Okay, in this plant male flowers are produced, male flowers are there, and it is the water level, means this plant is produced below the surface of water, while in this plant female flowers are produced, means it is the male plant and it is the female plant. Male flower produces pollen grains After producing pollen grains, these pollen grains are floating on the surface of water, while in female flower, the stigma is long. Sorry, the style is long and the stigma is present at the water surface, so that these floating pollen grains are deposited on the stigma because this style is long, so much long. Okay, next. Now, there are two types of hydrophily. Just now I explained you about Vallisneria. So these Vallisneria plants are present below the surface of water, hence it shows hypohydrophily. Hypo means below and epi means upon. You know this. So these are the two types of hydrophily: hypohydrophily and epihydrophily. Okay, we'll see one by one. So hypohydrophily. Pollination occurs below. You should underline over here. Uh, Pollination occurs below the surface of water. Here, the pollen grains are heavier than the water, sink down and caught by stigmas of female flowers. For example, zostera, that is sea grass. The pollen grains are long, ribbon-like and without exine. See in this diagram, these are the roots of the plant. It is the male inflorescence, ribbon-shaped leaves you can see over here. While this plant is female plant because it produces this gynoecium, that is stigma, style and ovary. Okay, so it is the female flower which is having stigma, and whatever the pollen grains produced at this male inflorescence, they are floating on the water surface. Male flowers are floating on the water surface, but whole plants, both male as well as female plants, are present below the water surface. So hypohydrophily, pollination occurs below the surface of water. Here the pollen grains are heavier than the water. Pollination occurs below the surface of water. Okay, that's why hypohydrophily. Pollination, you know that the pollen grains produced at the male flowers are deposited on the stigma. This process is called as pollination. It may be self pollination or cross pollination, but in this case pollination must be cross pollination because male flowers are different than the female flowers, or both the plants are different over here. So pollination occurs below the surface of water and hence it is called as hypohydrophily. Here the pollen grains are heavier than the water. Pollen grains are heavier than the water and they sink down. When they are sinking down, means these male flowers, when they are sinking down, at that time it is deposited on the stigma, means it is caught by the stigmas. म्हणजे मेल फ्लॉवर्स इथे वरती जड असल्यामुळे दे आर हेवियर दॅन द वॉटर अँड दॅट्स वाय दे सिंक डाऊन, ते खाली साचतात आणि ते साचत असताना त्या स्टिग्मावर पडतात किंवा ते पकडले जातात. दे आर कॉट बाय द स्टिग्मास ऑफ फिमेल फ्लॉवर्स. फॉर एक्झाम्पल झोस्टेरा, that is sea grass, and adaptations are the pollen grains are long, ribbon like and without exine. Okay, you can see this here the stigmas are long, ribbon like and without exine. Okay, pollen grains. Next, epihydrophily. The pollen grains float on the water surface and reach the stigma of female flower. Here Vallisneria, and that was Zostera. So here see, the pollen grains float on the water surface and reach the stigma of female flower. For example, Vallisneria is submerged dioecious freshwater aquatic plant in which female flowers reach the water surface temporarily to ensure pollination and male flowers float on the surface of water. So what happened here? The pollen grains or male flowers are present at the water surface and female flowers are also present below the water surface, but they enlarge their stigma and reach up to the water surface to take or to pollinate these pollen grains. So what pollination process takes place at the surface of water, upon the surface of water, hence it is called as epihydrophily. The pollen grains float on the water surface and reach the stigma of female flower. For example, Vallisneria is submerged, means Vallisneria is present below the water surface, that is submerged. Dioecious means it is having male and female flowers. Freshwater aquatic plant, it is present in the fresh water like river, pond, lake, in which the female flowers reach up to the water surface temporarily. Okay, they enlarge their stigma and they reach up to the water surface temporarily to ensure or to happen pollination process, and male flowers float on the water surface. Specific gravity of pollen grain is equal to that of the water. That is why they float on the water surface. Specific gravity. Specific gravity of pollen grain means whatever the gravitational force acting on the pollen grains is equal to the um, gravitational force acting on the water molecules. Okay, both are equal and hence they can float on the water surface. Means pollen grains are floating on the water surface because their specific gravity is equal to the specific gravity of water. That is why, okay, next, some aquatic plants are anemophilous. So whatever the plants they are showing epihydrophily, some of them are anemophilous, means they are pollinated by wind. For example, potamogeton and halogaris. Okay, these are the two types of aquatic plants which shows epihydrophily by wind, that is anemophilous. And some aquatic plants are there which are entomophilous, means these aquatic plants are also epihydrophilous, and they the pollination takes place by the agency of insects, entomophilous, insects. Okay, for example, lotus, water hyacinth, water lily, etc. Okay, you know that lotus, you know, water hyacinth means that pistia and pistia like plants, and water lily. Now always remember, okay, you can read this carefully, and these terms are very much important for your exam point of view. Flowers which use autogamy consist of several adaptations in the structure of a flower to facilitate this process. It occurs without external pollinating agents. Whatever the flowers they are showing autogamy, that is self pollination, they are adapted to facilitate that process, and there is no involvement of external pollinating agents, means non living जे आहे water and wind, through water and wind they show autogamy. Now when the flowers open to expose its sex organs, it is called as chasmogamous. When flowers opens to expose its sex organs, means the purpose of opening of flower is to expose their sex organs like either androecium or gynoecium. At that time that flower is called as chasmogamous. Okay, they are not opening uh, by natural process, or often the purpose of their opening is to expose their sex organs, either androecium for pollen grains or gynoecium for exposure of stigma. These flowers are called as chasmogamous. Next, the contrivances, a condition that leads to, okay, to favor self pollination are bisexuality, homogamy, and cleistogamy. सेल्फ पॉलिनेशनच्या उद्देशाने जे काही फ्लॉवर्स पॉलिनेशन होतं त्याच्यामध्ये बायसेक्शुअलिटी आयदर दे आर हॅव्हिंग they are bisexual, means they are having androecium as well as gynoecium, or homogamy and cleistogamy. See, homogamy means what? When the anther and stigma of a flower become mature at the same time, that is called as homogamy. Okay, when anther and stigma mm, when anther and stigma of flower become mature at the same time. Okay, anther means androecium and stigma means gynoecium, they become mature at the same time, simultaneously at the same time, that is called as homogamy. But in some flowers are some flowers are self pollinated even before the opening of the flower. म्हणजे फ्लॉवर जेव्हा बर्ड कंडिशन मध्ये असतात, कळी असते, त्याच वेळेला ते सेल्फ पॉलिनेशन करू शकतात, फ्लॉवर ओपन होण्याची गरज नाहीये. ओके, So some flowers are self-pollinated. Even before the opening of the flower, such condition is called as cleistogamy. Underground flowers in some plants which exhibit cleistogamy are never opened. For example, Comelina bengalensis. So it is the name of the plant in which self-pollination takes place, but flowers are not opened. Okay, these are the underground flowers in some plants which exhibit cleistogamy. So you should remember this. There is no need of opening of flower for pollination. The self pollination is done inside the flower only when it is closed or in bud condition. Next, plants like Viola Comelina can produce both chasmogamous as well as cleistogamous flowers on the same plant. So some plants are there, Violina or Comelina. These plants can produce both type of flowers, chasmogamous and cleistogamous, both. You know chasmogamous when the flower open to expose its sex organs, okay, and cleistogamous just now I explained you, okay. Next point we'll discuss in next slide. Okay, thank you.